If a stranger hands back your kingdom's soul, you do not point a weapon at his chest, you kneel. The voice cut clean through the chaos, low and musical and impossible to ignore, and for one suspended second the whole arrivals hall seemed to forget how to breathe. Ethan Brooks stood exactly where the royal guards had boxed him in, palms open, shoulders tight, the station's cold white lights glaring off the rain-slick floor around his boots. The air smelled like ozone, overheated wiring, and the bitter metal tang that always followed a hard docking cycle. Somewhere overhead, a transit alarm pulsed in slow red flashes, painting the polished walls with the color of a distant emergency. He had finished 12 hours inside maintenance shafts no tourist would ever see, crawling through humming ducts with a wrench between his teeth and grease in the seams of his knuckles, and all he had wanted was a train home, a shower, and maybe 3 hours of sleep before the next shift. Instead, 6 armored figures in silver-blue ceremonial plating had surrounded him in the center of Port Meridian's main concourse, tall enough to turn the crowd into shadows. Their helmets were sleek and faceless, their capes trimmed in midnight thread, and every insignia on their breastplates caught the light like frost. Travelers had backed away in a widening circle, their whispers blending with the station's multilingual announcements until the whole place sounded like static dressed up as panic. Ethan's heart thudded once, hard enough for him to feel it in his throat. He had been accused before, late rent, unpaid debt notices, equipment damage that wasn't his fault, but never like this, never beneath chandeliers of floating glass and under the gaze of people dressed like history books. "Sir," one guard said, voice flattened by a helmet filter, "step away from the royal property." Ethan blinked. "I already gave it back." His words came out rough, carrying the dust of the lower decks and the fatigue of too many night shifts. He looked past the ring of guards to the woman standing a few feet beyond them. She was taller than he had realized when she was moving through the crowd, her slate-gray travel cloak fallen open now just enough to reveal a fitted gown the color of deep water. Her skin held the cool glow of turquoise glass under moonlight and a thin silver circlet rested against her dark hair as if light itself had chosen to stay there. She did not look frightened anymore. She looked furious in the precise, controlled way only powerful people ever seem to master. One gloved hand was pressed over the ring now resting on her finger, and that tiny movement made something in the guards shift. Not relax. Not yet. Just hesitate. Ethan swallowed. 10 minutes earlier, it had been nothing more than a flash of blue-white brilliance skittering across the station floor near his boot, another rich traveler's lost jewelry in a place where rich travelers lost things and poor workers were expected not to notice. He should have kept walking. God knew he needed the money. His mother's medicine bill was folded in the inside pocket of his jacket right now, soft at the corners from being opened too many times. But then he had looked up and seen her turning in the crowd with that sharp, searching expression, one hand empty, the other trembling just once before she locked it still. So he had picked up the ring and run after her. That should have been the end of it. The woman stepped forward, and even the guards gave way. Her golden eyes found Ethan's with unsettling precision, as if she were measuring something deeper than fear. Then she said, for the whole station to hear, "He returned what your empire failed to protect." And all at once the silence changed shape. 11 minutes earlier, Ethan Brooks had not been thinking about empires, royal insignias, or the kind of trouble that arrived wearing polished armor. He had been thinking about the ache in his lower back, the grit behind his eyes, and whether the last commuter shuttle would leave without him if the freight elevator stalled again on Subdeck C. Port Meridian always felt different at shift change, like the station itself was exhaling. The deep mechanical hum inside the walls softened by half a note, the maintenance corridors emptied, and the bright public levels filled with travelers who smelled like expensive soap, recycled cabin air, and destinations Ethan would never be able to afford. He stepped out of the service lift into the main concourse with his tool case knocking lightly against his leg, grease drying in thin dark lines along his hands despite the industrial cleanser he had used twice before clocking out. Above him, suspended glass lanterns floated beneath the vaulted ceiling, each one glowing with a pale gold core that reflected off the wet floor where passengers had tracked in rain from the docking bridges. Station announcements rolled overhead in 6 languages, smooth and practiced, warning of departures, delays, and customs restrictions no one ever seemed to listen to. Ethan tugged the collar of his faded work jacket a little higher and kept moving, head down, shoulders forward, trying to fold himself into the anonymous current of people. He was halfway to the eastbound platform when a burst of motion caught his eye. A woman in a gray travel cloak turned sharply through the crowd 30 feet ahead, not stumbling exactly, but moving with the controlled speed of someone who did not want to look like she was running. Her hood was low, her posture straight despite the rush around her, and there was something about the stillness in her neck and shoulders that made everyone else seem clumsy by comparison. She brushed past a luggage porter, pivoted, and for one brief second the cloak opened at her wrist. Something small slipped free, struck the polished floor with a bright metallic note, and spun away in a ribbon of reflected light. Ethan stopped. The object rolled in a tight silver-blue circle and came to rest against the toe of his boot. At first glance it looked like a ring. At second glance, it looked like the sort of ring that paid off debts. The band was smooth and pale as frozen water, but the stone set into it was stranger than any jewel he had seen in a pawn display. Light moved inside it, not sparkling on the surface but flowing under it, slow and alive, like a pulse beneath clear ice. Tiny etched lines ringed the metal in a pattern too precise to be decorative. Ethan crouched and picked it up. The metal was warm. Not warm from the floor or from someone's hand a minute earlier, but warm in a steady, impossible way that made his thumb tense against it. He looked up. The woman had not noticed yet. She was nearly swallowed by the crowd now, all gray fabric and quiet urgency, moving toward the diplomatic wing where security tightened and ordinary workers like Ethan were reminded, without words, where they belonged. He could feel the folded bill in his jacket pocket pressing against his chest, a pharmacy notice stamped final reminder in red. He could picture his mother at the kitchen table, trying to smile while pretending she was not counting pills. For one thin, ugly second, he did the math. Then the woman slowed, turned, and patted her empty hand once. Even across the concourse, Ethan saw the change in her face. Not panic. Something worse. Recognition. Loss. He closed his fingers around the ring, drew in a breath full of ozone and rain-cooled metal, and started after her. Ethan almost lost her twice before he reached her. Once near a row of self-check kiosks where a family with 3 rolling cases clogged the aisle, and again at the threshold to the diplomatic corridor where the lighting changed from warm station gold to a colder, cleaner white that made everyone look a little less human and a little more official. "Miss," he called, then felt stupid the moment the word left his mouth. She did not slow. He picked up his pace, boots skidding slightly on the damp floor, tool case thumping against his knee. "Hey," he tried again, louder this time. "You dropped something." That stopped her. Not dramatically. She just froze in place with such complete stillness that the crowd had to bend around her. When she turned, the hood of her cloak shifted back an inch, and Ethan saw her clearly for the first time. Her skin was not just blue. It was the blue of tropical water seen at dusk, rich and cool and somehow luminous under the station lights. Delicate silver markings traced from the corner of her temple down the side of her neck, so faint he might have missed them if she had been farther away. Her eyes, startlingly gold, locked on his face first, then dropped to his hand. Ethan lifted the ring between 2 grease-stained fingers. "This yours?" For a second she did not answer. The noise of the station seemed to pull away from them, the announcements, the rolling bags, the distant hiss of airlocks cycling open and shut. All of it dimmed under the pressure of her silence. "Where did you find that?" she asked at last. Her voice was low and smooth, but there was strain under it, like a cable pulled too tight. "Near platform 12, Ethan said. It hit the floor. And rolled." He took one step closer and stopped when he saw her shoulders tighten. Up close, the gray cloak was finer than he had realized, threaded with a subtle iridescence that moved when she breathed. She glanced past him, quick and sharp, scanning the crowd behind his back. Not the glance of someone worried about losing jewelry. The glance of someone making sure the wrong person had not heard the conversation. Ethan followed her line of sight without turning his head. Two men stood near the entrance to the diplomatic wing, dressed in dark civilian coats too heavy for the climate-controlled concourse. They were not looking at storefronts or departure boards. They were looking in this direction with the fixed patience of people waiting for a signal. Ethan felt a quiet little chill move down his arms. "I can just hand it over and go," he said. "I am not trying to cause a problem." Her gaze flicked back to him. For the first time, something softened there. Not trust. Not yet. Surprise, maybe. As if men in worn jackets were supposed to make different choices. She held out her hand. Long fingers. Bare, except for a narrow silver band on her smallest finger and the pale indentation where the larger ring had been. Ethan placed it in her palm. The moment the metal touched her skin, the stone awakened. Blue-white light flowed through the band in a silent pulse, climbing around her fingers like a living circuit before settling into a thin halo beneath the gem. Tiny etched symbols flashed once, precise and ancient, and the air between them gave off a faint scent like rain striking hot stone. Ethan stared. She stared at the ring with a kind of contained dread, as though relief had arrived wearing the face of a new problem. Then her hand closed around it, and she lifted her eyes to his. "You should not have followed me," she said softly. "Probably not," Ethan answered. "But it was yours." Something changed in her expression then, small but real, like the first hairline crack in ice at the start of spring. She opened her mouth to speak again, but before she could, the station alarms came alive overhead. The alarm did not sound like panic. It sounded like authority. 3 measured tones rolled through Port Meridian, deep enough to vibrate in the polished floor. Followed by a chime so precise it felt expensive. Around them, the station shifted in an instant. Security shutters slid halfway down over the luxury storefronts. Blue guidance lights brightened along the ceiling. Passengers who had been drifting in lazy, jet-lagged currents suddenly moved with purpose, pressed back by invisible lines of protocol Ethan had never known existed. The 2 men in dark coats near the diplomatic entrance touched their wrists at the exact same time, and Ethan realized they had not been waiting for a signal. They had been the signal. "What did you do?" he asked, keeping his voice low. The woman looked past him, not at the crowd now thinning in nervous waves, but at the corridor to the right where a side passage opened toward restricted customs. Her hand closed tighter around the ring. The blue-white glow had faded, but not completely. It still pulsed beneath her fingers, faint and steady, like a second heartbeat. "Nothing they will admit out loud," she said. Then her eyes locked onto his with sudden force. "Listen to me carefully. If anyone asks, you found it on the floor and returned it immediately. You did not see who was following me." Ethan stared. "I did not even know I was supposed to see that." "Good," she said, though the word carried no comfort. The first guards appeared a second later, stepping out of the diplomatic wing with the cold efficiency of a machine unfolding. They were taller than the station officers Ethan was used to, their silver-blue armor fitted close at the joints and faceted along the chest like layered crystal. Long dark capes moved behind them without a wrinkle. Their helmets reflected the station lights in sharp white lines, hiding every trace of expression. Ethan had spent most of his life around uniforms of one kind or another, shipping inspectors, transit police, corporate security. These were different. These men did not look like employees. They looked like a decision already made. The nearest one lifted a hand and the crowd peeled back even farther. A clear ring opened around Ethan and the woman, the empty space on the gleaming floor making them feel suddenly exposed, as if the whole station had become a stage neither of them had agreed to step onto. "Citizen," the lead guard said, voice filtered smooth and metallic, "place your hands where they can be seen." Ethan blinked and did exactly that. His tool case slipped from his grip and landed with a hollow clack beside his boot. "I am not resisting," he said. I work maintenance. I was heading home. Another guard moved to his left, then another behind him, until the air around Ethan felt narrowed by polished armor and quiet judgment. He could smell rain drying on their cloaks and the faint mineral scent of charged metal. Across from him, the woman drew herself taller. Something in her bearing changed, subtle but unmistakable. The fear Ethan had glimpsed a moment ago did not vanish. It hardened into control. "Stand down," she said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Every guard froze. Ethan turned toward her, confusion cutting clean through his fatigue. The station lights caught the silver tracery at her throat, and for one impossible second he saw not a traveler in a borrowed cloak but someone born inside ceremony, someone who had been taught since childhood that entire rooms would rearrange themselves when she spoke. The lead guard lowered his head by half an inch. It was not quite a bow, but it was close enough to make Ethan's stomach drop. Then he said, with careful formality, "Your Highness, please step back from the civilian." The words hit Ethan harder than the alarm had. "Your Highness." For a beat, the station seemed to tilt around him, all the polished glass and drifting light and polished uniforms rearranging themselves into a picture he had not known he was standing inside. He looked at the woman again, really looked this time, and every detail he had filed away as strange or expensive suddenly fell into place with brutal clarity. The cloak was not merely fine fabric. It was formal weave, threaded with shifting metallic fibers that marked rank. The silver lines at her throat were not jewelry. They were ceremonial markings, old and precise. Even the way she held herself, chin level, shoulders relaxed in the center of a circle of armed men, belonged to someone who had spent her whole life being watched. Ethan felt grease drying on his skin and became abruptly, painfully aware of the scuffed toes of his work boots. "I said stand down," she repeated, and the lead guard lowered his head a little farther. "The ring has been returned." Returned. Not recovered. Not seized. Not confiscated. Returned. The difference was small enough to vanish if a person did not know how power worked. Ethan had grown up around landlords, supervisors, and collection agents. He knew exactly how much weight a single chosen word could carry. The lead guard straightened. "Your Highness, protocol requires that any civilian who handled the signet be detained for questioning." His voice stayed respectfully flat, but Ethan heard the tension underneath it, like strain in a beam before a crack. The woman's golden eyes did not leave the guard's helmet. "Then question me first," she said. Because if he had chosen greed over decency, you would all still be searching the lower decks while the true failure walked free. A ripple moved through the other guards, subtle as cloth shifting in a draft. Not defiance. Discomfort. Ethan stood very still with his hands open at shoulder height, trying to look harmless and failing mostly because harmless men were not usually the center of royal security incidents. A pulse beat in his temple. He glanced at the travelers watching from behind the security line, faces lit pale by station lights and curiosity, then back to the woman. "I really did just give it back," he said, quieter now. "I did not know what it was." Her gaze flicked to him. There was something almost unreadable in it, something like disbelief softened by exhaustion. "I know," she said. The lead guard stepped forward half a pace. "Citizen, state your name and occupation." "Ethan Brooks," he answered. "Maintenance technician. Environmental systems, Sector 9 through 12. The guard paused as if that information did not fit the scene in front of him. "Identification?" Ethan nodded toward the chest pocket of his jacket. "Station badge. Left side." Another guard moved in, careful and impersonal, and withdrew the worn plastic card clipped inside. Ethan caught a flash of his own photo, taken 3 years ago before sleepless nights and overdue notices had hollowed out the edges of his face. The guard scanned it, then handed it to the lead officer. "Verified," he said. The woman's fingers relaxed slightly around the ring. A faint blue glow slipped through the seam of her hand and vanished again. "You will return his badge," she said. It was not a request. The lead guard did as ordered, but his helmet turned toward Ethan one fraction too long, as if measuring him against some hidden standard and finding the entire situation offensive. Then the woman took one deliberate step toward Ethan, close enough for him to catch the clean mineral scent of her cloak beneath the station air. Her voice dropped so only he could hear it. "When I speak next," she said, "do not argue, do not apologize, and do not try to be brave. Just tell the truth." Before he could answer, she turned back to the ring of guards, lifted her chin, and let her voice carry across the silent concourse. "If a stranger hands back your kingdom's soul," she said, each word clear as struck glass, "you do not point a weapon at his chest. You kneel." No one moved at first. The station held itself in that strange, weightless silence that comes after a sentence too true to ignore. Then, slowly, the lead guard lowered to one knee. The others followed in a clean metallic wave, capes brushing the rain-slick floor, helmets bowed beneath the drifting gold light of the concourse. Around them, the watching crowd drew in a collective breath. Ethan had never seen authority bend in his life. Not landlords, not supervisors, not transit inspectors, not men with money in tailored coats. But these soldiers bowed without hesitation, and in that moment the woman beside him stopped being a mystery and became something far larger, someone the room itself seemed to recognize. When she spoke again, her voice lost none of its calm, but the edge in it sharpened. "Seal the corridor. Remove every unofficial witness feed. No one leaves with recordings." The guards rose at once and began relaying commands through wrist units that glowed with pale blue script. Security glass darkened along the diplomatic wing. A field shimmered briefly over the nearest exits, clear as heat above summer asphalt, then settled into invisibility. Ethan felt the world narrow around him with quiet, terrifying efficiency. He had spent years fixing broken fans and cracked coolant pipes in the bones of Port Meridian. He knew systems. He knew cost. Everything happening around him was built by people who had never once asked what anything cost. The woman turned to him, the gray cloak falling back just enough for Ethan to see the formal collar beneath it, deep midnight fabric stitched with silver constellations. "My name is Lysra Vale," she said, as if offering him a truth instead of a title. "Princess-Regent of House Vale, heir to the cerulean throne." Ethan stared at her for half a second too long. "That sounds," he said, then stopped, because there was no version of the sentence that did not sound stupid. Her mouth shifted, not quite a smile but close enough to count. "Complicated?" "Expensive," Ethan said. To his surprise, a faint, tired amusement flickered in her eyes. It vanished quickly. She lifted her hand and looked at the ring now settled against her finger. Up close, the stone no longer looked like jewelry at all. It looked like a piece of captured sky, blue-white light moving within it in slow tides. "This is the morning signet of my mother," Lysra said. "It is older than the station, older than the trade treaties, older than the first maps your species drew of our part of the stars. It carries lineage markers, court authority, encrypted records, and the living seal that confirms succession." Ethan let out a breath through his nose. "So when you said kingdom soul, that was not just a dramatic way of putting it." "No," she said softly. "It was the plain version." The words landed heavier than any speech could have. He looked at the ring, then at the men in dark civilian coats who had disappeared during the confusion, and a cold thread of understanding pulled tight in his chest. "Someone wanted that gone," he said. Lysra's gaze sharpened. "Yes. And if I had picked it up and walked the other way? You would have been followed, searched, and most likely blamed." There was no cruelty in the answer. That somehow made it worse. Ethan rubbed a thumb against his palm, feeling the ghost warmth of the metal that had been there a minute ago. "I was trying to do the right thing." "I know," Lysra said, and this time the exhaustion in her voice showed through. "That is why you are still standing here." The lead guard stepped closer and removed his helmet at last. He was older than Ethan expected, his face angular and silver-marked at the temples, his expression disciplined enough to pass for carved stone. "Your Highness," he said, "the royal shuttle is ready. For your safety, and for his, this civilian must come with us." Ethan looked from the guard to Lysera, then to the sealed corridor and the silent crowd beyond it. His shift had ended 20 minutes ago. His train was gone. His life, he realized with a hollow little jolt, had gone with it. Lysera held his gaze for one measured second and said, "Ethan Brooks, you returned what nearly every court in the galaxy would have stolen. Now you are coming with me." The walk from the concourse to the royal shuttle took less than 3 minutes and felt longer than the last 3 years of Ethan's life. The guards closed around him in a silent formation, not rough, not careless, just absolute. Their boots struck the polished transit bridge in perfect rhythm while the station lights washed over silver armor and midnight fabric, turning every surface cold and expensive. Ethan carried his tool case because no one had told him not to, and somehow that made the whole thing feel even stranger. Grease under his nails. Utility jacket still damp at the cuffs. A maintenance badge clipped crooked over his chest. He looked like exactly what he was, a tired working man at the end of a bad shift, and the hallway around him looked like it had been built for people who had never once cleaned up after themselves. The bridge opened onto a private hangar sealed off behind translucent energy panels that hummed with a low, glassy tone. Beyond them waited a shuttle unlike anything Ethan had ever seen outside a news feed. It was not large by cargo standards, maybe 60 feet from nose to tail, but every line of it was graceful instead of practical, all curved silver plating and blue-lit seams that pulsed like breathing. The hull reflected the hangar lamps in soft waves, as if the metal remembered water. Lysera climbed the boarding ramp without looking back, though the slight stiffness in her shoulders told Ethan she was holding herself together by force. At the top of the ramp, the older guard from the station removed one glove and touched 2 fingers to his chest. "Commander Selk," he said. "Royal Household Guard." Ethan shifted his tool case to the other hand. "Ethan Brooks. Maintenance technician. Very unofficial guest." Something unreadable flickered in the commander's expression. It was not warmth, but it was almost human. "You understand the situation is delicate." "That is one word for it," Ethan said. Selk studied him for half a second. Then stepped aside and motioned him on. Inside, the shuttle was quieter than the station by an almost unnatural margin. The air carried a faint mineral chill, clean and dry, with none of the recycled smell of public transit. Blue light ran beneath the floor in thin lines, guiding the eye toward a central chamber furnished with restrained luxury, pale seating curved into the walls, transparent display panels drifting above a silver table, storage compartments hidden so neatly they might not have existed at all. There was not a single exposed bolt anywhere. Ethan noticed that first because exposed bolts were honest. This place was not built to show its workings. Lysera stood near the forward viewport, one hand resting against the glass as Port Meridian's lights shimmered outside in long ribbons of rain and traffic. Without the hood, she looked less disguised and somehow more tired, the silver markings at her temples brighter against skin gone cool with strain. She did not turn when she spoke. "Sit, Ethan." He obeyed mostly because his legs had started to remember 12 hours in maintenance shafts. The seat adjusted itself beneath him at once, reshaping to distribute weight with a sophistication that felt faintly insulting. Selk remained by the hatch with 2 other guards, all still as sculptures. Ethan set his tool case at his feet and looked at Lysera's reflection in the glass. "Am I being detained," he asked, "protected, or blamed in a more comfortable room?" That finally made her turn. For one brief moment, despite the royal bearing, despite the ring glowing faintly on her hand and the soldiers surrounding them, she looked young in a way crowns probably hated. Young and very tired. "At the moment," she said, "I am deciding which answer keeps you alive." The shuttle lifted with a motion so smooth Ethan only knew they had left the hangar because the station lights began to fall away behind her like a city sinking under dark water. The shuttle crossed the orbital dark in near silence, a silver ghost moving above the curve of Earth while Ethan sat with his hands folded loosely between his knees and tried to understand how a normal night could break so completely in less than half an hour. Beyond the forward glass, the planet turned in swaths of storm cloud and city light, blue-white weather systems drifting over continents he had only ever seen on old classroom maps. Inside, the cabin remained cool and still, every surface softly lit, every sound controlled, until the whole craft felt less like transportation and more like a thought too expensive to interrupt. Commander Selk eventually gave a low order in his own language, and the other guards withdrew through a side hatch with the clean efficiency of men who knew exactly how much space power should occupy. That left Ethan alone with Lysera and the low hum of engines so refined they sounded almost like distant whine through glass. She stood at the viewport for a few seconds longer, fingers resting near the ring on her right hand, then crossed the cabin and sat opposite him. Up close, without the public posture and the armed circle and the station lights glaring down on both of them, she looked less like a figure stamped onto currency and more like a woman carrying too much weight without permission to set any of it down. "You had time to keep it," she said. "No accusation. No ceremony. Just a quiet fact." Ethan leaned back, the seat adjusting to him again with polite arrogance. "I had about 3 seconds to ruin my life in a new and creative way." A faint breath escaped her, not quite laughter but warmer than anything he had heard from her so far. Most people would have chosen differently. Most people have not spent the last 2 years learning what panic costs. Lysera studied him, gold eyes steady and far too clear. "Explain." Ethan looked past her for a moment, at the reflection of the ring's pale glow against the polished wall. He had not planned on saying any of this to anyone, least of all a princess from another world, but exhaustion had a way of stripping a man down to his honest parts. "My father used to fix transit pumps on the river platforms outside Baltimore," he said. "Good with his hands. Bad with pressure. One winter he found a corporate credit stick in a locker room. Enough money on it to clear our rent, pay off our heating debt, maybe keep us comfortable for the first time in years. He kept it." Lysera did not move. "What happened?" "It was traceable. He told himself he would return it after he moved some funds around, after he bought time, after he stopped being scared. But fear does not work like that. It does not take a little and leave the rest of you alone." Ethan rubbed his thumb over a grease stain on his palm that industrial cleanser had failed to remove. He lost his job, then the appeal, then whatever pride he had left. "My mother spent years paying for one bad decision that lasted less than a minute." Lysera's expression changed in some small interior way, as if a locked door had opened one careful inch. "So you returned the ring because of him?" Ethan shook his head. "No. Because of her. My mother used to say that being poor is already hard enough without becoming the kind of person who steals hope when it is lying unguarded." Silence settled between them, not empty now but alive with thought. Lysera lowered her gaze to the signet, and for the first time Ethan saw grief move openly across her face. "My mother said something similar," she murmured. Then the ring brightened. Not enough to flood the cabin, just a cool pulse spreading through the stone and casting thin lines of blue-white light across Lysera's fingers. A transparent display unfurled above it in a fan of floating symbols, elegant and sharp, and Ethan watched her face go still in a way that made the air seem suddenly thinner. "What is it?" he asked. Her eyes scanned the glowing script once, then again, and when she looked up at him the tiredness was gone. In its place was something colder. "The signet recorded an access attempt," she said. "Not at the station. Inside the palace." For a moment Ethan thought he had misheard her. The shuttle kept gliding through the dark with that same unnerving grace, Earth turning slowly beyond the glass, while the blue-white display hovered above Lysera's hand like a shard of winter light cut into symbols. "Inside the palace," he repeated. "As in your palace." Lysera closed her fingers and the projection collapsed at once, the light sinking back into the stone until only a faint pulse remained. "The signet is key to my bloodline," she said. "It does not merely store authority. It remembers contact, location, and unauthorized attempts to read or overwrite its sealed records. Someone accessed the succession archive from within the royal complex less than 20 minutes before I lost it. Ethan felt the timeline click into place with a cold precision he did not like. The hurried movement through the concourse. The men in dark coats. The alarm. None of it had been random. So the ring was not just dropped, he said. It was taken, or nearly taken, and then pushed into public space. Lysera's gaze sharpened with reluctant approval. Yes. In a crowded station, any disappearance becomes confusion. Any recovery becomes spectacle. And any witness becomes useful. Ethan let that settle for one heavy second. Useful to who? That, she said softly, depends on whether they need a scapegoat, a corpse, or a miracle. The bluntness of it should have sounded cruel. Instead it sounded tired, like a truth she had been forced to memorize. Ethan looked toward the sealed hatch where Commander Selk had disappeared moments ago. Does he know? Selk knows enough to be dangerous to the wrong people, Lysera said. That is why he is still alive. She stood and crossed to the viewport again, ring hand lowered at her side, the pale light from the stone tracing the clean line of her jaw. If the signet had vanished entirely, one story would have spread through court by morning. Careless heir. Unstable succession. Weak claim. But now there is a problem. Ethan frowned. Me. She turned her head slightly, just enough for him to catch the reflection of her eyes in the glass. You are not part of any house, any faction, any palace arrangement, or any trade pact. You are a maintenance worker with overdue bills and station grease on your hands, and yet you return the most valuable object you could have sold in 10 systems. That makes you difficult to predict and harder to discredit. Ethan gave a dry little breath that did not qualify as a laugh. That might be the nicest way anyone has ever called me inconvenient. You are very inconvenient, Lysera said, and now there was no mistaking the ghost of warmth in her voice. It vanished when the hatch slid open again. Commander Selk entered first, his face set tighter than before, 2 guards behind him carrying a slim metallic case no larger than a briefcase. He stopped at the edge of the cabin and touched 2 fingers to his chest. Your Highness. Preliminary sweep complete. The concourse feeds were partially scrubbed before our people locked the grid. Someone anticipated the alert. Lysera did not move. And the 2 operatives in civilian coats? Gone. Selk's mouth hardened by a fraction. Their transit signatures were ghosted through diplomatic clearance channels. Ethan looked from one of them to the other. Meaning someone with access opened the door for them. Selk's eyes landed on him, cool and assessing. Meaning, Mr. Brooks, that you are no longer merely a witness. You handled the signet after an internal breach. Anyone trying to bury this event must now account for you. The metallic case clicked open in the guard's hands, revealing a set of neatly arranged items, a change of formal civilian clothes, a communication band, and an identification tab etched with the royal crest. Ethan stared at them, then at Selk. I do not suppose that is a gift basket. No, Selk said. It is camouflage. Lysera finally turned from the glass, and the blue-white pulse of the ring lit her face from below like a vow made visible. By the time we land, she said, the palace will already be choosing what story to tell about tonight. We are going to make certain they do not get to choose without me. They did not enter the palace through the grand approach. Ethan understood that much the moment the shuttle banked away from the illuminated upper terraces and descended instead toward the darker underside of the royal complex, where the elegant towers gave way to foundation struts, service docks, and maintenance access spines running beneath all the polished ceremony above. From a distance the palace had looked like something carved from moonlight and ocean glass, all sweeping arcs and suspended bridges glowing blue against the night. Up close, from below, it looked more honest. Cooling vents breathed in slow white plumes. Conduits the width of tree trunks pulsed with regulated power. Cargo rails stitched the lower platforms together in clean industrial lines. Ethan felt a strange, almost grounding relief at the sight of it. Every palace, every empire, every holy symbol in the universe still needed pumps, filters, pressure valves, wiring, and tired people who knew which panel to kick when the fancy systems stopped behaving. The shuttle settled into a shadowed docking cradle with barely a tremor. As the hatch opened, cooler air flowed in carrying the scent of ionized metal, wet stone, and a faint mineral bite of industrial coolant. Lysra had changed. Nothing about her appearance except the cloak, which had been swapped for a darker one with the hood drawn lower and the silver thread muted to almost black. Ethan, meanwhile, had been handed the contents of the metallic case and told to put them on. The clothes fit better than they had any right to: charcoal slacks, a dark high-collar jacket with no visible insignia, soft boots that made almost no sound on the floor. He still felt like himself inside them, which somehow made the whole disguise worse. Commander Selk led them off the shuttle without fanfare, accompanied by only one other guard now, a broad-shouldered woman named Turin whose expression seemed permanently carved into professional disapproval. "If the central receiving hall is compromised," Selk said as they moved down a narrow service corridor, "the ceremonial route is no longer acceptable." "It was never acceptable," Lysra replied. "It was decorative." Ethan glanced sideways at her. "I cannot tell if that was a royal insult or a practical observation." "With her," Selk said dryly, "it is often both." The corridor curved deeper into the palace foundations, its walls made of matte black composite inset with thin blue guide lights at ankle level. Pipes ran overhead in meticulously labeled bundles, and every 100 feet a maintenance hatch broke the seamless perfection of the wall. Ethan's eyes kept drifting to them out of instinct. Pressure gauges. Access locks. Thermal bleed patterns near an intake seam. He was looking for trouble without even trying anymore. Lysra noticed. "You have been studying the walls since we landed," she said. "Occupational hazard," Ethan answered. "People who build beautiful things usually hide the ugly parts behind panels. The ugly parts decide whether the beautiful things keep working." Something in that seemed to strike her harder than he intended. Her gaze moved along the conduit lines overhead, following the unseen circulation of air, heat, and power. "No one in court ever talks about this level," she said quietly. "They talk about the throne room acoustics and the ceremonial bridge reflections and the imported stone in the eastern gallery." "That tracks," Ethan said. "Nobody thanks ventilation until it fails." Selk slowed at an intersection where 3 service routes met beneath a transparent floor overhead. Through the glass above, Ethan could see the blurred movement of palace staff in formal white uniforms, carrying trays of crystal, flowers, and glowing display ribbons. Preparations. Ceremony. Whatever story the palace was preparing to tell, it was being polished right now under bright lights. Selk pressed a hand to the wall console, but before the hatch could open, Ethan caught a detail that made his skin tighten. "Wait," he said. All 3 of them turned toward him. He stepped closer to the console, crouched, and ran 2 fingers along the lower seam where the access plate met the wall. The metal was warm on one side, cool on the other. "This panel was opened recently," he said. "Not by normal use. Somebody popped it fast and reseated it crooked by maybe 1/8 of an inch." Turin frowned. "You can tell that by touch." Ethan pointed to a nearly invisible smear of dark residue near the latch. "And by that? Conductive dust. Same kind we use on station override kits when a lock needs to cycle without logging the first attempt." Silence gathered around a tiny black mark like a storm-finding shape. Then Lysra lifted her eyes from the panel to Selk, and when she spoke, her voice had gone very still. "Someone is not only waiting for us," she said. "They are using the servants' roads." Selk did not touch the compromised panel again. Instead he led them down an adjacent service route that bent beneath the palace like a hidden artery, narrower than the first corridor and warmer by several degrees from the heat rising through the structure above. Ethan could feel the machinery of the place around him now, the faint tremor of circulation pumps, the soft hiss of pressure balancing through ducts, the occasional far-off thunk of a freight lift locking into place. Overhead, through narrow strips of reinforced glass set into the ceiling, fragments of the ceremony drifted past in pieces, white-robed attendants carrying luminous banners, musicians in silver collars crossing a bridge, servants adjusting rows of floating lanterns until the whole upper level glowed like captured starlight. The palace was still preparing to celebrate something. That, more than the hidden tampering and the stolen access, made Ethan's stomach knot. Whoever was arranging trouble had not cancelled the ceremony. They had folded it in. How many people know we landed on this level? Ethan asked quietly. Too many, Turin said before Selk could answer. Her voice had the clipped precision of someone who trusted facts more than comfort. Not enough to include the exact corridor, Selk added. Unless someone inside my command has been read into another loyalty. Lysera kept walking, one hand near the ring, her expression gone calm in that dangerous way Ethan was beginning to understand. It was not the calm of peace. It was the calm of a blade resting flat before it moved. Then we proceed as if every official route is already compromised, she said. Agreed, Selk replied. They reached a service lift hidden behind a matte black maintenance hatch, the sort of door no guest would ever notice. Selk opened it with a manual code instead of the wall console, and the four of them stepped into a narrow platform lined with exposed rails and old-fashioned emergency grips polished smooth by years of use. The lift rose fast, the motion pressing lightly through Ethan's boots, and he watched level indicators blink upward in silent blue numerals. Substructure. Utilities. Staff transit. East gallery support. Ceremonial wing beneath the sound chamber. It stopped one floor below the main hall. When the door parted, the air changed at once. Warmer. Fragrant. Full of cut flowers, heated stone, and the faint sweet scent of ceremonial oils burning somewhere nearby. Through a decorative lattice ahead, Ethan could see part of the antechamber beyond, nobles in layered midnight robes, advisors wearing jeweled shoulder crests, a sweep of polished floor reflecting chandeliers that floated like pale moons. At the center of it all stood a tall man with silver-threaded dark robes and a face so composed it was almost empty. He was speaking softly to a cluster of courtiers who leaned in as if listening to gravity itself. Lysera went still. Lord Varric, she said, and even under her control the name landed colder than the floor beneath them. Ethan studied the man through the lattice. There was nothing dramatic about him. No theatrical menace. No obvious threat. That made him worse. He looked like the kind of person who could reorder a room with a sentence and then forget what he had destroyed by dinner. He is supposed to be in the Western audience chamber greeting trade envoys, Selk murmured. Which means he changed position after learning I was delayed, Lysera said. The ring on her hand brightened once, a restrained pulse under her skin. Ethan followed her gaze and saw, on the far side of the antechamber, a ceremonial archway opening toward the main hall. Beyond it waited the stage where the succession rites would be read before the court. Lanterns. Banners. Witnesses. A perfect place to tell one official story and bury every other version beneath applause. He looked back at Lysera. You said earlier I was inconvenient, he murmured. Maybe that is the only reason we still have. Her golden eyes shifted to him, sharp and searching. Meaning? Ethan glanced up at the vented ceiling above the antechamber, then at the maintenance access map half remembered from the palace levels flashing through his mind. Beautiful places hid their ugly parts. Ugly parts gave you angles no one in Silk ever considered. Meaning, he said, feeling his pulse steady into something colder and more useful than fear, if Lord Varric wants the story told on that stage, then we should arrive from somewhere he forgot to guard. The route Ethan chose was not on any ceremonial map. It ran above the antechamber in a maintenance crawlspace barely 4 feet high, packed with heat ducts, light conduits, and the quiet mechanical truth of a palace that preferred to pretend it floated on dignity alone. Turin went first, muttering once under her breath about how royal security had not been trained to crawl through service shafts, and Ethan almost smiled despite the pressure in his chest. Behind him, Lysra moved with more grace than the space deserved, dark cloak gathered close, the signet casting a faint blue pulse against the black metal around her. Through vent slats cut into the floor, the voices below rose and fell in polished waves, formal greetings, ritual phrases, the soft music of people preparing to witness history without ever suspecting history had already slipped in through the ceiling. Ethan stopped at the final grille and looked down. The main hall opened beneath them in a breathtaking arc of silver stone and suspended light. Hundreds of lanterns floated overhead like captive stars. A long ceremonial bridge of glass crossed the center of the chamber, leading to a raised dais where the succession rite would be spoken before the court. Nobles in layered midnight robes filled the gallery tiers. Advisors, ministers, military officers, trade envoys, all arranged in elegant rings around the platform. At the foot of the dais stood Lord Varric, one hand folded behind his back, the other lifted as he addressed the court with calm authority. Even from above, Ethan could feel the man shaping the room to fit his voice. "He is beginning without you," Selk murmured from behind. Lysra's face went very still. "No," she said. "He is beginning because of me." Ethan examined the grille. Old locking pins. Secondary release fused shut with decorative sealant. Beautiful people loved useless details. He reached into his tool case, found the flat service key he used for vent housings on Port Meridian, and worked it into the seam. The metal gave with a soft click. "When this opens," he said quietly, "do not hesitate." Turin gave him a sharp look. "You are very confident for a man in borrowed boots." Ethan kept his eyes on the latch. "No. I am a maintenance worker. I just know what happens when a system fails in front of a crowd." The grille swung inward. Below them, Lord Varric's voice carried through the hall. "In light of tonight's regrettable instability, and in the interest of preserving continuity, I am prepared to recommend a temporary transfer of ceremonial custody until the signet can be formally recovered." A murmur moved through the court, controlled but real. Ethan saw the lie take shape the way smoke fills a room, thin at first, then everywhere. He dropped through the opening onto the rear service ledge behind the dais, landing hard enough to jar his knees. Heads turned. Music stopped. Light seemed to pause in the air. Turin and Selk descended after him in one clean motion, but it was Lysra who changed the room. She stepped out from the shadowed service arch with her hood falling back, turquoise skin luminous beneath the lantern glow, silver markings bright as drawn moonlight at her temples. The signet on her hand flared to full brilliance. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Lord Varric did not move for one remarkable second. Then he inclined his head with elegant surprise. "Your Highness," he said smoothly, "what a relief." Ethan felt the lie in the words like grit between his teeth. Lysra walked past him without haste and mounted the dais alone. "Relief," she repeated, her voice carrying to the farthest tier without effort, "is not the word I would choose for a man who announced my absence before confirming my loss." Varric's expression remained composed. The court required steadiness. The court required truth. Lysra lifted her hand, and the signet answered. Blue-white light poured upward in a lattice of living script, filling the hall with radiant lines that reflected in every polished surface. A record unfurled above the dais, timestamps, access logs, sealed archive alerts, and beneath them all the unmistakable marker of an unauthorized attempt originating within the palace succession vaults. A hush fell so complete Ethan could hear the distant breath of the ventilation system in the walls. Lysra's golden eyes fixed on Varric. "You did not lose the morning signet," she said. "You failed to steal it." Then she turned, not to the nobles, not to the ministers, but to Ethan standing in dark borrowed clothes at the edge of the royal platform. In front of the entire court, she extended her hand to him. "Mr. Brooks," she said, and there was something fierce and grateful in the use of his plain human name, "for the second time tonight, will you return what was never yours to keep?" Ethan crossed the last few steps beneath 100 stunned faces, placed the ring into her waiting palm, and watched the entire chamber see what no speech could soften or erase. The throne had been saved not by power, but by a tired working man who had refused to become smaller than his conscience. For several long seconds after Ethan placed the signet in Lysera's hand, no one in the hall seemed willing to disturb the shape of the truth. The floating record still burned above the dais in blue-white threads, its light reflected in crystal, polished stone, and the stunned faces of a court that had just watched power change direction. Lord Varric stood where he was, elegant posture intact, but the center of the room had already moved away from him. Ethan felt it happen the way a mechanic feels a load shift through a failing beam, not loudly, not all at once, but with absolute finality. Lysera closed her fingers around the signet and the living script folded inward, sinking back into the stone until only a calm, steady glow remained. When she spoke again, her voice was neither triumphant nor cruel. It was worse for any liar in the room. It was clear. "The succession record stands verified," she said. "The breach has been witnessed. The attempted transfer is void. Until a full tribunal is convened, Lord Varric is relieved of ceremonial authority and all access to the vault systems of House Vale." There was no dramatic outcry, no chaos, only the quiet thunder of protocol changing hands. Ministers bowed. Advisors lowered their eyes. Across the chamber, Commander Selk stepped forward with the measured inevitability of a door closing against a storm, and the guards who answered to the throne moved not with spectacle but with obedience so old it looked like instinct. Ethan did not watch Varric after that. He watched the nobles instead. He watched them recalculate the moral geometry of the night, watched expensive people realize that history had entered the room through a maintenance grate and wearing borrowed clothes. Lysera turned to the court, the signet bright against her skin. "Let the official record show," she said, "that the morning signet was not recovered by force, nor preserved by title, nor secured by rank. It was returned freely by Ethan Brooks of Port Meridian, maintenance technician, citizen of Earth." The words crossed the hall like a bell struck once in winter air. Ethan felt every eye land on him, but for the first time since the station alarm began, he did not feel small under it. Embarrassed, yes. Exhausted, absolutely. But not small. Lysera descended from the dais and stopped a single step in front of him. Up close, under the lantern light, the hard composure she had worn all night had finally cracked enough for honesty to show through. He saw the cost of the evening in the tension around her eyes, in the careful set of her mouth, in the relief she was still too disciplined to call relief. "The throne owes you a debt," she said softly. Ethan glanced out at the court, then back at her. "With respect, Your Highness, that sounds expensive again." This time she did smile, small and real and bright enough to change her whole face. A murmur of surprise moved through the nearest tiers, as if the court had never expected its future ruler to look young. "Then choose something modest," she said. Ethan thought of the lower decks of Port Meridian, of broken intake fans patched 3 times too many, of workers sleeping through double shifts because rent waited for no one, of his mother stretching medication by hope and stubbornness. He took a breath. "Improve the station clinic contracts," he said. "And the maintenance. Protections on the lower transit decks. People down there keep your world running. Most of them cannot afford to get sick in it." Silence met the request, but it was not shocked this time. It was listening. Lysera held his gaze for one measured second, then nodded. "Done. No consultation. No council delay. Just one word," and Ethan understood with a strange little chill that mercy in the hands of real authority could move faster than fear ever had. Then, before the court and the chandeliers and the endless polished witness of the hall, Lysera reached to her smallest finger and slipped free the narrow silver band he had noticed earlier in the station. It was simple compared to the signet, a clean circle of pale metal with a single blue line running through it like a horizon at dusk. She took Ethan's grease-marked hand and placed the ring in his palm. "This one is not lost," she said. "I am giving it. Ethan looked down at the quiet silver resting against the rough lines of his hand. Around them, the palace gleamed with all its old power, but for the first time that night it did not feel untouchable. It felt inhabited. Human. Breakable in the right ways. Beyond the high glass of the ceremonial hall, earth turned below in bands of cloud and city light, patient and blue and impossibly far from the lower decks where his shift had started. Ethan closed his fingers gently around the ring, and in the hush that followed, with the lanterns floating like stars no one could own, he understood something the great houses and bright titles had almost forgotten. The universe did not change because